So these next two questions relate to slavery and racial equality or inequality in California's history and government. And many people, just for an initial thought here, are not aware, for instance, that the first governor of California, Peter Burnett, was a slave owner from Tennessee. So these two questions pertain to the recent signing by Governor Newsom of AB 121, which will allow a task force to study and make recommendations for reparations to descendants of slaves in California for California's role in slavery. So the question is, considering that there were many early public officials who had migrated to California for gold before 1850 from the southern states, often bringing slaves, are you opposed or in favor of the study, and why? So again, this is the governor is convening a study, and part of the idea of the person that submitted the question is the idea that some of these people that were making the decisions in the very beginning of the state's history actually had owned slaves or come from slave owning families. So the question is, again, are you opposed or in favor of this study, and why? And it's a study to look at possible reparations, to make recommendations for reparations to the descendants of slaves in California for California's role in slavery. So go ahead.
Who is it? Is it me?
Yes, we're gonna, I think we're back to starting. Are we back to George? Do you guys remember? Who just answered the last question? That was Tracy, so now we're going to George.
I think it's my turn.
Oh, Tracy, it's your turn to start?
Yeah, I think it's my turn, okay. George. Because I'm going to be quick about this, I promise you. Because it already brings up emotions for me because, it always brings up emotions. When with the slavery and all this, this dividing. And again, I'm here to unite. And so therefore, it's about politics sometimes. People are always looking to divide us with a conversation. Of course, my community needs healing in all directions. And, sometimes that brings up an argument from the taxpayers and, my generation didn't do that. And, these things are going to start an argument once again. So Tracy has a tunnel vision to focus on Placerville. This is my objective and my mission right now. Emotionally, it angers me, right? So that's automatically for me, for coming from Mississippi, the home of the slave, right? My grandparents told me miserable stories. Oh my God, you know what I mean? So I have those stories later, right, in life. But right now, my main focus is to bring the city together. In order to make a good decision, we have to be in a healthy situation. We're not in a healthy situation. Everybody's trying to divide this whole nation, try to divide Placerville. I'm trying to raise my family. I'm trying to let them go to school. I'm trying to raise these children. I'm so focused, and while we all divided, we left our eyes off the children. Kids committed suicide. Kids have been me getting pregnant, all kind of the drug addiction, all these things, because these politicians like to bring things up to make sure that we focus on something where we can all start arguing. And so, yeah, it's beautiful to have a task force. I'll let them do their job because it's going to take a little time to find and see what's going on. But I'm really hopeful about the healing of my community, the Black community, when it came to our schools and, coming with incentives and learning things and stuff like that, as far as we've been in a position of systematically kind of held back at times. And so that sounds great. And I hope Governor Newsom can kind of go into that. But my focus, Tracy, is on my community members and the people that I live around and the people that I work with. And so therefore, like I say, we'll let the task force do their job. But again, sometimes I feel like the politicians have a ploy to always divide us. They know things like this always start a big argument because it's not put out right. It's not at a time when we can sit down and have a conversation about it and so people can understand. So that's my opinion on that at this time. Thank you.
Okay. And so, but just to back to the kind of, I think we got a sense, but so as far as doing the study, you're saying yes, do the study, but think of these larger issues
Yes,
as
what
far
I'm
as
saying is,
community.
yeah, community. That's my whole thing. Like it's community. I'm trying to raise the children. Anti-racism. All out. Like everybody, like mad. Everybody's going through this time where we want to separate. And so sometimes I feel like the politicians above us, the people that do things, they do things to split us, to gain votes, and do things like that. And when we are grown people, where we can sit down and have these conversations, where we can heal each other. Everybody know we didn't had a little something that happened not a little something, major horrific things that happened in the past. And so we can have these conversations as grown adults to see how we can take care of things. But right now, as far as Tracy Bunch, my whole objective and mission is to heal the city. And those are some things that like I see people get very concerned about. And so I want to focus what's in front of me right now so I can make sure my children and everybody else's children grow up to look at each other like brothers and sisters and protect each other and things like that. So, we're still fighting over this at this day.
Thank you.
And so, yeah.
Thank you so much. And so, George, you'll be next. I think you have the sense of the background. Are you opposed to or in favor of this study that Governor Newsom has called for?
Well, I think it's something that could be looked at. I think it seems like to me, and Tracy's right, it seems like politicians always trying to do things to divide us. And it's wrong. Because, I'm being a pastor of a church. I believe in equality. And we're made in the image of God. We are. It doesn't care what color we are or what. We're all made in the image of God. And if we follow God's law and the law of the land, we could all work together. And this is a problem what's happening in our nation today. We need to come together as one. And I pray for that all the time because we're so divided right now. And it's sad to me because I don't look at Tracy any different than I would look at anybody else because he's my brother. And that's what we should be looking at right there because we're all brothers and sisters in the eyes of God. So, I just wish this country would come together and get back to God because it would make a big difference for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, George. John Heidel, are you opposed to or in favor of Governor Newsom's study of reparations?
I want to echo George and Tracy's comment. This is a politically divisive study, and that's not what we need at this point in time. I am for smaller government, not more government expanding and getting more involved with our lives. From that perspective, I lean towards local government to deliver the services that they're best suited to do and minimal government in between that. We need a state government, we need a federal government, but don't expand government's role of overseeing people. Let us live our lives. And this is one of those things that I just don't think helps us at this point in time. So I'm open to considering what the results of this study would be, because I suspect we're going to have a study. But my question is there going to be any local representation on it? Or is it strictly a governor's appointed committee that's going to come back with an answer? We all know what it is, and it's a politically driven answer. That's wrong in this point in time. We have to stop the divisiveness and work on issues that bring us together, not separate us.
Okay. Mandy, are you opposed to or in favor of Governor Newsom's study of reparations regarding descendants of slaves?
I agree with John in a lot of ways. Who's going to be doing the study? Who's going to be represented in the study? And I do believe that the African American community should be recognized as such. They have such a unique story, and a lot of it is very painful, but it should be recognized. When we had Tina Alexander on last week, we talked about that, the history, the Black history specifically of Placerville that nobody knows about, and it's been erased, and that is a disservice to everybody, no matter what color they are. So when I'm trying to bring it back locally. It's digging into that history, be it that African American history here, be it the Native American history here, the French, the Chileans, the Chinese. Dig deeper. Let's have conversations. Let's not be afraid to have conversations. And I feel like right now, at this point, we are so divided. And Tracy and I have a very unique opportunity in this city that was so diverse and so cultural at one point, that him and I are not afraid to have the conversation, where we see a lot of people in government and in our local government that, not to be mean to them, but they don't know how to start it. And so if we want to move forward and we want to recognize all people and give everybody a voice, then we need to look at people who are willing to sit down and have the conversations. You don't have to agree on everything. If you sit down and agree with everybody, that is not that fun. So I look forward to having these conversations. It's long past due, and I would like to bring some healing to everybody. And when we have these conversations, we get to know people on a human level, and that's what brings unity. So that's really what I have to say.
Thank you, Mandy. So again, following up, and this is again, and it does bring it, in this case, again, back to Placerville, although I think this relates to Coloma as well, which is county as opposed to city. But the point is, this last question says, Placerville has several families that have maintained land and wealth dating back to the gold rush. Some of these families also have a long history in politics that date back also to the 1800s, early 1900s, proceeding to present, and all of white descent. So this part of balancing what happened with where we are today is the question, considering that there were African American families, former slaves, that had acquired equally as much land and wealth, would you agree or disagree that it is worth studying why those same families today have no land or wealth dating back to when gold was discovered? So this just, again, the reference was made to Tina Alexander's work. You know, there are people that are looking back at, you know, property owners and you know, just, you know, some of that early African American community in California. You know, there was a lot of wealth there, but it doesn't seem like it carried forward to present the same way some of the original white families carried that wealth forward. And so it's just asking, this question is, you know, do you agree or disagree that that would be worth studying, why those same families today don't have the land and wealth that their heritage ancestors did back when gold was discovered? If you understand this question. It's a little complicated, but the idea is simply that, you know, there were some very, you know, wealthy, important families at the time of the gold rush, both white families and black families. And it seems like the white families that were powerful and, you know, had a lot of wealth back then have continued to build that wealth over time and are still powerful today, whereas it doesn't seem true of the powerful black families that are associated with the gold rush. So it's just simply to ask the question, do you agree that we should try to understand why that is, that disconnect? Do you agree or disagree that it is worth studying why those same families today don't have the land and wealth that date back to when gold was discovered? So we'll start with George, and this is our last round of questions, common questions, and I'll just let everyone know, because I know we are going long, but this is just, there's so much obviously to all of these topics. We'll go through this question and then we'll all do closing statements, or we'll hear closing statements from the candidates. So again, do you think that we should study, again, this difference in the powerful, wealthy white families and black families from the gold rush, because there was powerful, wealthy families that were white and black, but something happened, since the gold rush, bringing it forward to today. Should we study that? Is it worth studying and understanding what happened? Starting with
Well,
George Turnbull.
Okay, I think it would be a good idea. Let me tell you a little bit about my family. We arrived in this county in the early 1800s. When actually this became a state, there were carpetbaggers that tried to take our property away from us. And we lost a lot of property during that time because it became a state. So we had to go to San Francisco, Hugh Turnbull Sr., to fight for some of the property that we had. And we lost a lot of property because of it. Because when it's just like what happened in the South. When the North came in and they took a lot of the property away from the Southerners and stuff at that time after the war. And it happened the same way here when they became a state. I mean, our family had to go through a lot of process to be able to save some of the land that we were entitled to. And it was wrong because we had to get an attorney and could you imagine in those days how long it took to get to San Francisco? It took a long time. But we had to fight for our property at that time and stuff because we bought it from the Spaniards. You know what I mean? We bought it for, I forget how much it was at that time, what they purchased it for, but they bought it from a Spaniard general at that time. And then when it became a state, then the carpetbaggers moved in and tried to steal a lot of the land and stuff that was around the surrounding areas. And I think that's something that might be a good idea to look into. And especially when you got to understand, Hugh Turnbull Sr. was part Cherokee. Well, half Cherokee is what he was at that time. And if you were a half-breed, you were basically scum at that time back in the old days and stuff. And that's why some of the things that he did wasn't recognized in the history books of today. But there is a lot of stuff out there about our family and stuff now. But at that particular time, because we were involved with the Donner Party at that time too, and Hugh brought 8 wagon trains across, and then he became a hauled freight from San Francisco or Sacramento to here, and Placerville after that. But that's something that's very critical, and that's something that needs to look into because we lost a lot of property because of that, because of these carpetbaggers that came in and took property away from us.
Thank you, George. John Heidel.
Yes, it's definitely worth researching, understanding, documenting, because I think most of us recognize we learn from the history of what our ancestors went through, and we're destined not to repeat it if we learn from that history. One of my concerns is our educational system, our kids, our grandkids are not learning the same history we learned. So that's problematic in my mind. But that aside, yes, my only caveat is I don't think it should be funded with taxpayer dollars. And that's where I'll draw the line.
Okay, John, thank you. Mandy, your thoughts on whether this should be studied?
Yeah, I like the idea of digging into our history. It's going to bring some understanding, and when you have understanding, you can begin to heal, and you can bring some unity and have some pride in where your history came from. So finding what happened to these African American families is, I think, very important. And I think that when we can look into finding what happened to these families, what happened to their wealth, I think there can be some really cool healing, and it's just kind of is baffling. And I know, everybody else hasn't listened to Tina's presentation, but it's absolutely fascinating. And she barely even scratched the surface of the African American families that were here, and they were freed. There were a lot of families here that were freed. So anyway, it's a fascinating thing, and there's no reason we shouldn't dig into it. And I guess I'll just go out on a limb here and go a little bit deeper and maybe answer things in a way that people might not expect. But, we talk about, making reparations. I see a lot of inner city areas that could use opportunities. And we could call it reparations, but we could also call it opportunities. Why not invest? We invest in wars all around the country, and we spend hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. Why couldn't we take that same money and invest it into our people? Because we have inner cities that are hurting, that are riddled with crime. They have no opportunities. Why not take that money that we spend outside of our country and focus it on our Americans? And I just, people get all up in arms when they hear the word reparations, but why does it have to be just writing a check to somebody? Like, why not invest in these communities? It baffles my mind that we can't get around that word. And if we start maybe referring to it as something else, we can actually have a conversation where it benefits everybody to invest in these communities. It benefits the country. So anyway, that's my thought.
Thank you, Mandy. Tracy?
Yeah,
Your
okay, how we
thoughts?
doing? I definitely heard the question, right? So therefore, I got that different perspective. I'm born and raised in Mississippi, right? So, the black farmers were really taken advantage of. Land was taken through Jim Crow, different laws where blacks couldn't fight back and things like that. I came out here to California and, like I said, new beginnings. And you look at the fact of, the Monroe family, Burgesses and things like that. And I wondered, that was just mystery to me. As quickly as I got into Coloma and we were doing a Black History month, and I found out that, the Monroe family owned like 80 acres out in Coloma. I thought that was mind blowing. It made me feel some type of way. It made me feel real good about things, like, wow, it was a late United. It made me go deeper into a point about the population of El Dorado County and the Burgesses too. And so I wondered, I was like, what happened? What happened to like the African Americans? Like, so I would ask those questions and people never could answer me. And so I would think it would be granted, just like with the tribes and the gold miners and things like that. People love their legacy, to know what they come from. And sometimes like helping your neighbor heal makes the community better. And so sometimes it comes with a cost of maybe taxpayers, maybe it comes with donation, grants or whatever. But that makes a person have empathy, because we do have a horrific past. And sometimes we take that and we brush it under the rug like it never happened. We can talk about what our grandfathers were and what they did, but we don't want to understand like what we do to make a right, a wrong a right. And that comes together to have that conversation. And that's me as a candidate that I'm always willing to do. Super intelligent. Also, like I say, I'm always formal, but I'm also kind and got a big heart. And so these things that are happening in our nation, it takes people like, these candidates tonight to have this type of conversation, because it's emotional. And when we act like it didn't happen or like we don't want to be part of anything, then that tells us a lot about who we are as a person. And so, I would love to have these, this look back in history to see what happened, so all of us can heal, not just one or two or three people or certain people in the population. Again, we're getting away from the part of the community, when some people houses are bigger, and some people feel like the homeless, or I heard some of the meanest things about the homeless. And I went up there and I visited the homeless. I'm that dude that can go up and have a conversation about, what do y'all need? We got you. I talk to the elderly. I talk to all our population. So when it comes down to looking back and seeing what happened to the African Americans, of course, there should not be a doubt about that. I would be excited, and I hope every other candidate would also. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, we've been on a journey tonight, and I just thank everyone again. And now is the time for closing statements. There's a lot to reflect on, but if you can try to just sum it up in about 1 minute. We'll start with John Heidel, and we'll cycle through all 4 candidates. And thank you again so much. John, what are your closing thoughts tonight?
Yeah, I'm a fifth generation Californian. My great-great-grandfather immigrated during the gold rush years, but he immigrated in the Columbia area. And so he did gold mining down around Columbia. Evidently, he was not real successful with that. So he moved down into the Valley of Salida area and started becoming a rancher, a dairy cattle farmer. And that's the roots of my mom's part of my generation. So there's a cemetery in Modesto that has 4 generations of my ancestors buried in that cemetery. I have a lot of reverence for that cemetery. It's a Catholic cemetery. And so a lot of my interest relative to history and historic things goes back to my ancestry, and want to make sure that there is recognition of that. There's a book written in Stanislaus County that talks about the early settlers into Stanislaus County. And I have 3 relatives that are referenced in that book. And that gives me great pride. And I think everybody should have pride in the way this county has been developed, the way California has been developed, and our history, because it's rich and it needs to be preserved. And we need to find a way to make sure that the next generation, the generations all to come, have the ability to understand that history, because it's all about understanding who you are and how we got here, right? We're always going to have new immigrants, but even the new immigrants need to understand how our country has evolved to become what it is. So that's kind of my closing statement, just as a background in terms of my personal history and ancestry.
Thank you so much, John. Mandy, what are your closing thoughts tonight?
Well, I guess if we're going to go from history, my mother immigrated here from Aruba. And so that's that side of the family. And then my father, his parents were from New Jersey. They grew up poor and they moved to Southern California in the Valley. And they started a grocery store, delicatessen. And so I come from a family of hard workers. And you know, a lot of people, especially right now, they're like, oh, I give up on California, you know, and this place is done. And I feel like I'm a stakeholder here. And my grandparents worked very hard. My grandparents started the Canoga Park Little League. I have history in, you know, in that area down south. I don't have it here, aside from living in El Dorado County for 25 years. But as far as the state of California, I feel like I'm a stakeholder. My grandparents and my father, they all worked very hard in this state and contributed a lot. And so as far as this area, when I moved here, I just fell in love with Placerville. I love the history, and I feel like I fit in here. And I didn't come here asking people to change. I came here because I just was welcomed and I fit in. And I want to preserve that. And I want to respect the people like George that have had, you know, generations and generations of family here. It's so unique to the West Coast. And it's just really cool to be a part of it and be welcomed. So.
Thank you, Mandy. Tracy, what are your closing thoughts tonight?
My closing thoughts are probably a little deeper sometimes when, you know, so some emotions came up for me with, you know, thinking back about home. You know, my grandfather and my grandma raised me. You know, Tracy has come from, you know, the reason I work with a lot of the needy families and needy kids and things like, because I was that kid, right? So, you know, being fatherless and things like that, I had to learn the hard way, a crash course. Never had any support. My mom was a great mom, and she did the best she could. My grandfather was a great minister, one of the greatest of all time in his whole nation. He could heal a revival. You know, we'd be under the tent. He baptized. He did everything. And then my uncles, they were military guys. You know, we had to go. My brother left home when I was a young boy, about 5 or 6 years old. And my brother was a 30-year vet in the Army. You know, he's a sapper. And, you know, that's the difference between me and him. He laughed sometime, and I think I have the answer. He laughed at me and said, well, you're a civilian, you know. And that means just between me and him, that's our little competition. And so I grew up with humble beginnings. Coming out to Placerville, the people that know me, I made something out of nothing. I worked hard at my job every day, and I had my phone on me. When I used to go in Walmart, people used to laugh at me because they have 10 kids with me. Those are group home kids. The reason I'm able to do what I do, I'm very good at cultivating because I know the pain of not having people around to support you. And so I had to pay that cost. And so I come out here and I made something of myself in order to run for city council. 15 years, I've broke my neck to make sure that I look out for the people. And, you know, God has blessed me to work for the, EDCO. And now I get a chance to help the kids with their education, you know, get them to college, you know what I mean, point them in the right directions. And, you know, a lot of people are cheering for me because it's inspiration that I'm bringing. You're not going to find too many candidates that come from nothing and have sought and been walking a straight, narrow line and bringing everybody together. It takes a very strong man, like I said, you know what I mean, take it how you feel. To me, to be an African-American when there's not too many out here, and to go into the racetrack and to go into the basketball game by myself and not knowing how people gonna receive me sometimes. I go into the race car track, I see a Confederate flag. Of course emotions come up, but I have to understand sometimes. And so by me being patient and loving, you find people taking care of me. One quick story. I went to that race car track with the kids. I think we were doing we were doing a bike race one night. You know, we do these traditions. So I bring the kids, these are orphans, you know what I mean? They're coming out to enjoy Placerville. And, you know, I'm sitting down at the bottom of the racetrack and I'm seeing mud everywhere, but I'm not understanding, right? And so I sit down by this mud and one of the guys at the top came down very immediately like, you don't want to sit there, right? That was their first welcome me. He said, you need to sit over here. And I didn't understand. I was like, okay, so we sat there. And as the cars came around, they spit mud all over the seats. And I looked back at them and I said, thank you. And so that was like a welcoming. You know, you can't judge a book by its cover. And that was one of the things that let my guards down in Placerville. So I'm here to be a great city councilman, not just for myself and my family, but all the families in the community. I want to work with George. I want to work with Mandy. I want to work with John. And I want to make everybody super proud. And so it's you want a voice as the people. And you don't want special interests coming in and we're losing downtown. You're looking at the candidates that's going to keep everything preserved. And so thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you, Tracy.
Yes, ma'am.
And with that, George, we'll have closing comments from you. You were the first to speak and the last to speak, so please share your closing thoughts.
Okay, well, Tracy, you know, I'm going to have to show you around the racetrack because I've raced at that speedway for years and years and years. So I'll take you around and show you all the different and introduce you to a lot of the drivers and stuff that I know. Would you like that? Anyway, you know, I just care about the history of our county and stuff because being 8th generation, you know, it was really kind of funny. The other day I was sitting at the shop and stuff and my cousin David come in. And I introduced him to somebody, and he says, "You're your cousin?" I said, "Yeah, he's my 7th cousin." 7th cousin? Are you kidding? No, it's kind of remarkable, you know, having all that kind of history and stuff of our family because I'm pretty much related to everybody, you know. And you don't want to talk about old families in this town because they're all intertwined somewhere or another. You know, am I right, John? He's shaking his head, yes. But so I just care about the history. I want to preserve the history of this county because, like I talked about, once the history is gone, it's gone. And I've got deep roots. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not at all. And our family's not going anywhere, especially when we have a cemetery, our family cemetery that's been for generations right there. So I just want to make sure that we preserve the history and look at some of these old buildings and stuff and do the right thing to restore them. And like the old church in Coloma would be a great project to, and it would actually put us on the map by restoring that, especially one of the oldest buildings in California at that time. So, like I say, I want to make sure we preserve the history. I care about the history, and I'm not going anywhere. All right, thank you.
Thank you all. And thank you to our audience. It's just amazing. We have had just 2 hours of such a rich conversation with these candidates, and we are all so lucky to have candidates that are willing to have these kinds of conversations. So thank you all for being with us tonight. We will get this recording posted on YouTube so it can be shared with others. and we will try to also include links to all of the other League of Women Voters forums so that people can also hear some of the things you had to say on other topics as well. But thank you so much. And with that, we will say good night. And everyone, please feel free to follow up with the candidates, because I'm sure there are lots of things we all want to talk with you about. But I think we've had 2 hours tonight. So great job, and, you know, best wishes for the rest of the campaign. And thank you so much for all your public service. Have a good night, everyone.